was one of the founding companies that went into the formation of American Car and Foundry. This particular photo was, as you can see, in very poor condition and is really bleached out. I've boosted the contrast a little bit in this to try and bring it out, but the original photo, I got a print of it. Frank Ellison had made a series of copy negatives, and I got some prints from him, and this is one that I got. But the original was clearly in very poor condition by the time he photographed it.
You know, Kyle, that note that on this near end, that's a full Sunset Herald.
Yes.
To give you an idea of how bad the photo is.
Yeah, that's a full Sunset Route Herald right there.
And all you're picking up is
Southern Pacific Company.
That is red.
What? The
Herald is red except for Sunset Route.
might be. Could be. On the reefers. There are some other pictures of Southern Pacific reefers that are in, I believe, in yellow. That are just a little bit later than this. Around 1900, ACF built some truss rod reefers that are in yellow. But they're experimenting, I think, with colors as well. I'll turn briefly to early tank cars. There are a number of interesting early tank car designs. The Snyder patent has this offset dome, and then the valve is in a little pocket right here. You can see these early pictures, and then on the patent papers, you can see how it works. So they have this opening. This one has a much taller tower, but some of them, the valve is actually tucked down inside that small part. And then interestingly, there's one of these tanks that is out in the forest in Pennsylvania that's still around. There are pictures on the web of it that survive, just the tank. A little bit more conventional design, although again, they've got the valve stuffed off here on the end. This is Murray and Lamson operate a car building firm in Pennsylvania. This is their design for a standard tank car. The early Pennsylvania oil fields were the source of a lot of early tank car design and innovation. And so a number of car builders, small car builders in that area specialized in tank cars. Union tank lines had a number of different tank designs, initially buying from different builders, later developing some of their own standard designs. So this is in the 1879 and 1884-88 car builders is this illustration. This is an early tank car that's actually on the Sierra Railroad. This particular tank car is subsequently involved in an accident, and Sierra was in the situation of you wreck them, you buy them, and this became Sierra Tank Car 601, which lasted fairly late. Apparently the dome was damaged because in the Sierra version, the dome is cut down a lot lower, but they used it on their own traffic. This particular photo is on the Angels branch, and obviously it's before the wreck because it's still a Union Tank Lines car.
Kyle,
Yeah.
is there any record that during the 1870s, some of these tank cars would have been brought down to Virginia City?
Well, you know, you got to ship kerosene somehow, and they are shipping stuff out west from the east. So it would be reasonable that some of these tank cars might well have brought some stuff out. Yep.
Any idea what the color scheme is on that Union tank line car?
These, there are some descriptions, and I'm trying to remember whether this is yellow or white. It may be yellow. I think the lettering here is white, and I think these are red domes and red ends, and then a brighter red, and this more of a freight car red. But there are some descriptions out there. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I'm sort of trying to dredge that up. So there is information out there that describes these early paint schemes. obviously, fairly quickly, these are a little bit later photos, but they go to the basic black, which probably works a little better when you're spilling oil. By the 1890s, you're getting some slightly larger designs. This real interesting three-dome car. There is about an 1874 photo of the Southern Pacific or Central Pacific shops, the car shop side, and it's the whole building. And tucked into the middle of it is, you can see a three-dome tank car that is very much like this, with a high center dome and the two smaller domes. You can't see enough to really make it out. I don't know what road it's for or anything, but there it is in the 1870s in Sacramento, and I'm fairly certain that it probably wasn't built there. It probably was an offline car that had some damage and needed to be repaired. But a nice little three-dome car like that. This single-dome car, Union Tank Lines, by the early 90s, they're standardizing on their design. This is the earlier, smaller tank car, like the one that was on the Sierra. This, again, is from the 1879 car builders. It's also in the 84 and 88 car builders. These larger drawings are in the 1895. This is a larger tank than this is, larger capacity. And then there's these wonderful drawings that the Smithsonian has of a Harrisburg Car Company tank from 1890. And at Jamestown, there is this tank on an old lumber flat car. And it's Harrisburg Car Manufacturing Company, 1890. So this tank is this tank from the same company, the same year. And one of these days, I have hopes of building a replica of this underframe and putting that tank back on that underframe. And then turning this back into a log flat. It's a Pickering car by this time, but it's at Jamestown now, owned by Railtown, 1897. There were also different experiments with combination cars. The problem with a tank car is that you typically had a load shipping in only one direction, and so you had to ship it back empty. So Brooks of Brooks Locomotive Works designed this combination car. This lower part is a tank. The upper part can be a body of any sort. He put a boxcar body. There's records. They built this car. They loaded up a load of oil to ship it for California. It got to Omaha. Union Pacific refused to accept the load. They claimed it was too heavy, and so it was sent back to its source. The load was taken out. The car went back to the Brooks Company. Brooks ultimately stripped the body off and used it as a little idler car and materials car around the Brooks shop. In 1900, in one of the trade journals, there's a picture of this car without the body, still in use at the Brooks Works. So it lasted quite long, in spite of the fact that its one revenue load never reached its destination. Here are the patent papers for it, 1877. Again, the general outlines of the car. This shows you how the interior works. Again, the tank is in the frame as well as below, and the car body up on top. Some other illustrations of that from the patent papers. And as you noted, Red Ball, originally in Dale Newton, Lair, Halliday, produced models of this car that are around, can be found with the paper sides all lettered. Let's see. So that's a little tour of cars. I'll talk very briefly about couplers and about trucks, just to sort of review. I think I've presented some of this before. The early link pin couplers, which are very dangerous because you have to stand between the car, moving cars, and not get smashed, not get your hand smashed, not get your body smashed, please. The early Central Pacific link pin couplers, typical coupler pocket, a fairly rectangular shape to this one. There are, again, hundreds and hundreds of different designs of the standard link pin couplers that are out and around. By the 1880s, the Central Pacific had adopted the Miller drawhead. So this is, again, out of the Car Builder's Dictionary. This is a cast version. This is a sample of the forged version that the California State Railroad Museum has in its collection. And we recently acquired this cast version. This was found down near Martinez. And so clearly this was on a car that came to California. Whose car it was, I have no idea. But there were a number of cast versions as well as forged versions that were around. Note that this front plate is missing on this particular coupler here. It's come off. It originally would have had this front plate. The advantage of these is that you have a fixed link here, you have a pin here, so you can push the cars together and then, when the cars aren't moving, step between, swing the two links into place, put the pins in, and you've got double links to make a stronger coupling, but also it's a much safer coupler because you don't have to stand between moving cars. Here's some pictures. The Underdog operation, building the Canadian Pacific, had a number of cars clearly either built by Central Pacific or built in their style. Flat cars with the in-sill captured between the side sills. But here in the 1880s, you can see that they're using the Potter draw head in these pictures. This is a flat car that's been wrecked and is turned upside down, but there's the Potter draw head, Central Pacific wrecking crane there. I believe that H.J. Small, when he became master mechanic, moved away from the Potter draw head, moved to some later styles. A little bit on Sam's couplers. The Central Pacific clearly never used Sam's. The V&T had apparently their own version of Sam's. The Carson, Colorado used Sam's. There were some other Sam's that were used around the area. So this is, I think, a sample of a real Sam's coupler. This one's down at Laws. Patent papers showing somewhat of how it works. Advertisements, again, showing how the coupler works, different aspects. The pin can be set so it sticks up, and when the cars come together, the jar of the cars hitting together makes the pin drop. So again, illustrated here. Also, there are fins on the pin that will hold, there's a little shelf in here that will hold that link up, so when the cars come together, they can automatically couple. Here's a picture of the combination that works. This is down at Ardenwood, Sam's coupler, and finally we have a real Sam's pin. We tried it out with the link. Here you can see the link being held up by the pin. Again, the link being held up by the pin. This is the pin set up so that when you push the cars together, the jar will make them drop. We tested it out, it worked. So slowly, we find all these little details. This is a coupler that is at Nevada State Railroad Museum, found in Brunswick Canyon. And it has the appearance of being a Sam's coupler, but it's not exactly a Sam's coupler. And no, the Sam's pin that we have does not fit in this coupler. We tried it. Doesn't work. But it seems to be the same sort of design, but it may be a V&T variant that they licensed or didn't license. Talk briefly about trucks. Again, lots of different types of trucks were used by the Central Pacific over the years. The V&T copied some of these truck designs. So this is the original 1860s truck design. A rigid truck. The V&T copied this. There are a number of samples of these that survive on V&T cars. This is the California truck as produced by the Central Pacific. The V&T also copied these designs. There are a number of those that survive. The California truck got replaced by the Thielsen truck. And this is the early light, what I call the light Thielsen truck. It has the arch end, a smaller casting here. Probably what I think, they took this casting, turned it around backwards, put some holes in it so they could rivet it to, these are channel steel transom beams. So this casting and this casting might be the same, but that's just speculation at this point. Again, this is the 1860s truck, and here's a surviving example, the V&T version of it. Several different pictures of it. Note that there's truss rods that run underneath to support this center plank. Part of the reason is that there's a spring cluster at the center, so transferring the weight from the car through this beam, through the springs, and into this, and then here's the truss rods to support this center. There's also a small spring cluster out at the two edges, but the center spring cluster is the important feature of this design. This gets replaced with the, yes?
Just probably a dumb question, but the board hanging on either end of the trucks, is that to protect the axle? And you can maybe on the ramp?
Which?
Next picture, the one you just gone to.
There?
Yes, right off the end of the wheel.
There, that's a brake beam.
Brake beam, okay.
Those are the brake beams. Yes. So here you have these are swing motion trucks. The 1860s truck is a rigid, not a swing motion truck. Or it might be what gets called a squirm motion truck because they're sitting on the springs and they can move a little bit there. But these transom beams then have swing links that hang off of this that support a truss plank underneath. This uses a leaf spring, and again, this casting in the center. Here are surviving examples on restored cars and semi-restored cars. These have all had the transom beams replaced with new timbers. One of the keys in looking, here's one of the original ones, is that these edges on the originals are chamfered. They're not sharp edge. So they put a little bevel on the edge just as a finish thing, but it also reduces the chance for splitting. If you look very closely, you can see the chamfer here on this one. The V&T also produced a narrow gauge version of this truck. It was used, Carson Tile Lumber and Fluming used it. Cars built for the Bodie and Benton and the Carson, Colorado used it. Oops, go back here. This flanger was built on one of these flat cars. This lasted very late, but it retained its original style trucks right there that would have been built in the V&T shops. But it's basically a narrow gauge version of that California truck that the V&T was building. In the very late 1870s, I believe, the Central Pacific adopted the Thielsen truck, which was a patented design. This is the light Thielsen, again with the arch, this smaller casting. This is the heavy Thielsen, larger journals, so heavier weight car can be carried. This casting is a larger casting. The only surviving one of these trucks that I know of is under this car, this caboose, that the California Western built using parts from Central Pacific. Includes the trucks. Here's some pictures of the trucks. This is at Roots of Motive Power. So this is the only surviving set of Central Pacific Thielsen trucks that I know of. Note also the Hewitt journal boxes that the Central Pacific adopted. And Carson, Colorado also adopted a narrow gauge version of the Hewitt journal boxes and lids. Again, H.J. Small came in, replacing A.J. Stevens after Stevens passed away. There was new research done. Small actually did a test between, there was a big debate whether swing motion trucks were more effective than rigid trucks. Small built two train sets, one with the Thielsen trucks, swing motion trucks, one with a rigid truck design. and ran them and did measurements and discovered that the rigid trucks were actually more efficient. Not only were they less expensive to build, less expensive to maintain, they were easier to pull. And so he adopted a new rigid design. That's this design. Here, note that the bolster is trussed on the top, so you don't need to have the center spring cluster to transfer the weight down as you had in the 1860s design. So this design is adopted by the Southern Pacific. They also sell copies or patterns to other folks. This is a car that was built by Holman for Oakland, Antioch, and Eastern. It has these trucks. At this point, we suspect that it was built with these trucks, and whether Holman bought a second-hand set of trucks from the Central Pacific, or whether they just bought a casting kit and built their own trucks, we don't know. But I believe, Randy, this has pattern numbers that match Southern Pacific pattern numbers
It has
on
Southern
it.
Pacific pattern numbers on the trucks and then also on some skate pockets.
Right.
They have records at Rio Vista that say that the car was delivered with those trucks from Holman. So,
Right.
so they've been able to prove that they are the original trucks.
California State Railroad Museum owned this car. During Rail Fair '99, there was a big joint project with SPCRR and Society for Industrial Archaeology and several others rebuilding this car. It was finished up. And then a few years ago in one of our revisions, we donated this car to the Bay Area Electric Railway Association, who are taking the car back as Oakland, Antioch, and Eastern with its original number. They've repainted it with its original number now.
Kyle,
Yeah,
it's over here, Tom.
yeah,
We're getting, starting to run into the next,
okay. So I'm just about there, and Carson, Colorado, of course, has some of these Thielsons, and that's the end.
I didn't want to stop you, I really didn't.
Not a problem. Thank you.
But I'm going to leave it up to the guys. We're through the break. Do you want to continue on with this next speaker? You're already on time. You want to take 10 minutes? 15 minutes, good? All right, so you're back in about 15 minutes. I want to call